Welcome to a deep dive, folks. This one's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
We're diving into Vietnamese philosophy.
That's right.
But here's the twist. We're using a university-level Vietnamese textbook on Marxist-Leninist philosophy as our main source.
It's a fascinating lens.
I know. You're probably thinking, dense, academic, maybe a little too much for a Wednesday afternoon.
Right.
But that's where we come in.
We break it down.
We're going to extract the core concepts.
Its historical context.
And what makes Vietnamese philosophical thought so unique?
You know, what's really interesting to me is we're not just dealing with abstract theories here.
Right.
This textbook gives us a glimpse into how an entire nation grapples with its history, its identity, its vision for the future, all through this philosophical lens.
Like a cultural decoder ring, almost.
Exactly.
We're decoding this blend of ancient traditions, colonial influences, and the rise of Marxist thought in Vietnam.
Yeah, and it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But trust me, some surprising insights are coming your way.
I'm right.
All right, so right off the bat, the text dives into the origins of philosophy itself.
Okay.
And it makes this really intriguing argument.
What's that?
Philosophy isn't some ivory tower pursuit.
Oh, I like where this is going.
It emerged from a very practical human need.
Practical.
Yeah, practical.
For ancient philosophers, just like, trying to solve everyday problems.
Well,
Yeah.
in a way, the text says it was born from humanity's need to understand the world and their place in it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, that's a need we all share, right?
And absolutely. I mean, who hasn't looked up at the stars and wondered about the meaning of it all?
Exactly. So the text is arguing that philosophy is basically just a formalized way of answering those big questions.
I can get behind that.
And get this, the text points out that philosophy popped up in both the East and West around the same time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 8th to 6th centuries BC, across major civilizations.
So it's not just a Western thing then?
Nope. It's like a universal human impulse.
That's pretty profound when you think about it.
Right. The drive to question, to understand our existence, it's got to be hardwired somehow.
It makes me think about how, even today, people from all walks of life are still searching for that meaning.
For sure. And the text goes on to trace how early philosophical thought, kind of evolved.
Yeah.
It talks about that shift from mythical thinking to logical reasoning. Uses examples like totemism and shamanism
Right.
to show how societies went from explaining the world through supernatural forces
I see.
to more rational explanations.
So instead of blaming an earthquake on angry gods, people started looking at, geological causes.
Exactly. It was a major turning point in intellectual history.
From because the god said so to because there's evidence.
Boom. And that brings us to, I think, one of the biggest debates in all of philosophy.
Oh, let's hear it.
Materialism versus idealism.
Right. And this is where our textbook's Marxist-Leninist roots really show, right?
Big time. It dives headfirst into that fundamental question. What's primary, matter or consciousness?
And it lands firmly on the side of materialism.
Marxist-Leninist materialism, to be exact.
Okay, break that down for me. What does it actually mean to say matter is primary?
It means that the physical stuff, the things we can observe, touch, interact with, they exist independently of our thoughts, our perceptions.
So our minds are shaped by the world, not the other way around.
Right. A pretty big shift from, say, like a religious viewpoint where a divine being creates everything.
For sure. And the text contrasts that with different types of idealism.
Oh, yeah, it gets into subjective idealism.
Which is basically
Reality is a product of individual minds.
like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around.
Did it make a sound?
Exactly, that kind of thing.
Right. And then you've got objective idealism.
Which gets a bit more, trippy.
A little bit. It's like saying there's this universal mind, a cosmic consciousness, creating reality for everyone.
Like Plato's forms, right?
Bingo. The text even uses Plato as an example of this kind of thinking.
Fascinating.
And here's where it gets interesting. The text is even critical of those pre-Marxist philosophers.
Really?
Yeah, the ones who call themselves materialists.
I thought they were on the right track, emphasizing the material world over ideas.
They were, but the text says they were still kind of imprisoned by a limited view of the material world.
Okay, how limited?
They focused on physical objects, but they didn't fully grasp the dynamic interplay of social forces.
So it's not just about the stuff itself,
Right.
but about how people interact with it.
Exactly. And how those interactions create systems
The structures.
that then influence how we think and behave.
Mind-blowing stuff.
The text even quotes Lenin to make this point.
Oh, let's hear it.
He says, and I quote, "Matter is that which, acting upon our sense organs, produces sensation."
Very grounded, very concrete.
It's all about emphasizing how our experience of the world, our consciousness,
Yeah.
is rooted in physical interaction with matter.
This is laying some serious groundwork.
It is. For understanding how Vietnamese philosophy, with that Marxist influence, will look at the idea of matter.
And how it shapes society.
You got it.
I am hooked already.
Good. Because next, we're going to explore how Vietnamese thought takes these ideas and applies them.
To its unique context.
You know it. Buckle up.
I'm ready.
I think you'll find that the Vietnamese interpretation is both fascinating and surprisingly relevant to the challenges we face today.
Can't wait.
Let's dive in.
All right, so how does Vietnamese philosophy, steeped in this Marxist materialist view, actually see the world working?
Oh, that's the question, right? Is it just a carbon copy of Soviet-style materialism or what?
Yeah, does it have its own, unique flavor?
Good question, and the text makes it pretty clear. Vietnamese philosophy, it's heavily influenced by Marxism, but it brings its own cultural and historical perspectives, too.
Okay, I like that.
Right.
So what's an example?
Well, for one, the text really emphasizes this view of the world as a unified material entity.
A unified material entity.
It's this idea that everything is interconnected, governed by laws that we can discover through science.
So there's a strong emphasis on, scientific understanding then.
Oh yeah, big time. No room for mystical forces or supernatural explanations here.
Got it. So Vietnamese materialists, as the text describes them, they're all about science as the key to understanding the universe.
On how society functions, yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so how does that scientific materialist perspective, how does that play out when we talk about society itself?
Well, they see social relationships, structures, as ultimately rooted in material conditions.
Meaning?
Think economic systems, level of technology, even geography.
Right.
All of that plays a huge role in shaping how societies develop and function.
So it's not just about, individual choices or ideas floating around?
Not just about that, no.
It's saying the material circumstances, that's where it starts.
It really is. It's a key takeaway from this text, for sure.
And is shaping how we live our lives.
Huge impact, yeah.
Wow. Okay, this is fascinating already, but the text, it doesn't stop there.
It keeps going.
Right. What else?
It brings up another fascinating aspect of Vietnamese philosophy. The evolutionary perspective.
Wait, we're not just talking about the evolution of, species, Darwin and all that, or
Bigger than that, yeah.
Okay, so how...
The text, it highlights how Vietnamese thought, influenced by Marxism, obviously, views the world, including society, as constantly in flux, constantly evolving.
So there's no, static system, everything's changing.
Everything's in motion, yeah.
It certainly feels relatable, right? My own life is always shifting, new challenges, new opportunities.
Exactly. And speaking of evolution, the text actually specifically mentions Darwin as a major influence on the development of dialectical materialism.
Hold on. Dialectical materialism. Can we just,
It's a mouthful, I know.
Yeah, can you maybe break that down a little?
All right, let's try this. Imagine you're baking a cake.
Okay, I like cake.
You've got your ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs, right?
Yep, the basics.
Important. But it's the interaction in the heat of the oven that transforms them into something new.
The cake.
The delicious cake, yeah.
All right, I'm following so far. Where's the dialectical part come in?
That's the process. The transformation, the interplay of those ingredients.
Oh, I see.
Dialectical materialism, it's a way of understanding change through the interplay of opposites.
So just like those cake ingredients have to interact in a very specific way, dialectical materialism is saying there are these opposing forces that kind of push and pull to create change in society.
Exactly. It's the engine of change.
So it's not just about things gradually changing. There's tension, conflict that drives things forward.
That's right. The text gives some really vivid examples.
Oh, yeah.
It talks about, for example, the transformation of quantity into quality.
Oh, okay. Give me an example of that.
Think about heating water.
Okay.
You can increase the temperature gradually, but at some point that change, the rising temperature, it leads to a totally different state. The water turns to steam.
Right. So small changes can eventually lead to something fundamentally shifting?
A tipping point, yeah.
And this applies to society, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Societal change, it often happens through this interplay of gradual shifts and sudden leaps.
driven by the tension between these opposing
You
forces,
got it.
like a philosophical pressure cooker.
Yeah, something like that.
And the text is saying that this dialectical materialism, it's the most complete way of understanding how change happens.
That's what it asserts, yeah. The most complete, profound, non-one-sided theory of development.
Because it takes into account that conflict and struggle are just inherent parts of the process.
That's a big part of it for sure. And that leads us to another concept closely tied to dialectical materialism,
What's that?
class struggle.
Okay, here we go. We're getting into some potentially tricky territory here.
We are.
How does the text present this idea of class struggle?
Well, it lays out that classic Marxist-Leninist view. It sees class struggle as the driving force of history.
Okay.
It's about that conflict between those who control the means of production.
The haves.
The haves, if you will, yeah.
And the have-nots.
Exactly.
I mean, it reminds me of that famous quote by Engels.
Oh, yeah.
The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles.
Nail on the head.
Yeah.
The text actually quotes Engels to emphasize how important this theory views economic power.
To understanding how everything works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Social and political dynamics, all of that.
Okay, so how does Vietnamese philosophy specifically address this? Does it just like parrot the standard Marxist-Leninist line?
It's interesting, the text, it acknowledges that Vietnamese philosophy, especially during its revolutionary period, really emphasized class struggle. But there's also this recognition that the country is in a different phase now,
Okay.
focused on building a more harmonious, socialist society.
So it's not all about perpetual conflict.
No, there's nuance there.
Yeah.
Understanding that different historical moments call for different approaches.
It's like they're trying to find that balance between like acknowledging the role of class struggle historically,
Right.
but also aiming for a more, I don't know, equitable and unified society now.
That's a great way to put it. Trying to reconcile that revolutionary past with a vision for a more peaceful future.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got class struggle, we've got this idea of historical change. What else?
Well, that focus on building a unified society, it leads the text into a really interesting discussion about the formation of nations.
And the role of national identity.
You got it.
So we're going from like these internal societal dynamics,
Yeah.
the bigger picture of how nations emerge and define themselves.
That's where we're headed.
Okay, let's get into it.
All right, this sets the stage for exploring another crucial concept, the role of the state.
All right, so let's talk about the state. That big, powerful entity that, well, seems to be everywhere these days. What's the Vietnamese philosophical take on that whole thing?
Well, it probably won't surprise you that the text leans pretty heavily on, you guessed it, the Marxist-Leninist framework.
Meaning?
They see the state as essentially an instrument of class rule.
Okay, so much for the idea of a neutral, benevolent state acting in everybody's best interest, huh?
Not quite the picture being painted here, no.
Yeah.
The text really emphasizes the state's role in maintaining order, defending against threats and promoting economic development.
Sure, those all sound good. But the text is saying there's an ulterior motive.
Well, it argues that ultimately all of those actions, they're aimed at preserving the power of, guess who, the dominant class.
It's a pretty cynical take, you gotta admit.
I mean, it's definitely coming from a specific perspective.
Right, but does Vietnamese philosophy just sort of echo the standard Marxist-Leninist line on the state, that it's a tool for achieving socialism?
Well, it's not quite that straightforward.
Okay, how so?
While the text definitely sees the state as crucial for getting to socialism, Vietnamese philosophy puts a particular spin on it.
What kind of spin?
It specifically argues that a socialist state has to be led by the Communist Party
To guarantee what?
to ensure that state power is truly aligned, like genuinely aligned, with the working class.
So it's not just about achieving socialism any old way, there's a specific path.
Exactly. And that path, according to the text, requires the Communist Party at the helm.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's a distinct interpretation, right?
Definitely. And it really reflects Vietnam's unique history and political situation.
But it's not all about systems and structures, right? I mean, from what we've discussed, there's also this surprisingly humanistic side to Vietnamese philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
So are we shifting gears here from all this talk of power structures and class struggle and now focusing on the individual?
In a way, yes. We're moving into how Vietnamese philosophy, despite its Marxist roots, really prioritizes human liberation.
Freeing people from oppression, all that good stuff.
That's the idea. And it's not just about changing the economic systems, it's also about empowering individuals to, reach their full potential.
Makes me think about Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah.
He really emphasized that individual responsibility, right?
Absolutely. And actually, the text quotes him quite a bit on that point.
The idea that even within a system focused on the collective, individual actions still matters.
It's pretty powerful when you think about it.
And it resonates, don't you think, with how much emphasis we put on personal growth and all that today?
I think it totally does.
Yeah.
Like there's this recognition that individual transformation is part and parcel of societal transformation.
But how does all that focus on individual potential, how does it fit with the idea of this new socialist human? That seems a bit, well, collectivist.
You're right. That's a good question. And it shows how nuanced Vietnamese philosophy can be.
So how do they describe this new socialist human then?
The text highlights revolutionary morality, dedication to the collective, but also continuous self-improvement.
So it's not about erasing individual identity.
No, not at all. It's more about cultivating certain values that benefit everyone, the individual and the collective.
It's finding that balance, right, between individual striving and contributing to the greater good.
Exactly. And that brings us to what's probably the most important question.
Hit me with it.
How does Vietnamese philosophy, with this unique mix of traditional ideas, Marxist thought, and humanistic ideals, speak to all the craziness we're dealing with in the 21st century?
Yeah, it's one thing to look at historical roots, theoretical frameworks, but how does any of this apply to the world today with all its problems?
Well, that's the challenge this text really leaves us with. It's not trying to give us easy answers.
So no magic solutions.
Nope. Instead, it encourages us to think critically, think creatively about how Vietnamese thought, which itself came from a history of struggle, might help us find solutions.
So it's more like a set of tools then.
A way of thinking that we can use to try to tackle the problems we face.
I get that. Okay, so the text specifically mentions the Fourth Industrial Revolution,
It
right?
does, yeah.
And all the changes that come with that. For jobs, relationships, even how we understand what it means to be human.
Big stuff.
And it's asking us to consider if Vietnamese philosophy, with its focus on both material conditions and human liberation, might offer some, I don't know, unique insights into navigating this uncharted territory.
That's exactly what it's doing. It's a call to action, really.
Take these ideas, these ways of thinking, and actually apply them, right?
To the real world, the challenges we all face every single day.
That's what I love about philosophy.
Right.
It's not just about theories. It's about giving us frameworks, different lenses to view the world and wrestle with those big questions.
We couldn't agree more.
Well, I feel a lot more equipped to ask those questions now. This deep dive into Vietnamese philosophy has been incredible.
I've loved exploring these ideas with you.
And to everyone listening, I hope you walk away with more curiosity, a willingness to challenge what you think you know, and maybe even some new tools to make sense of this crazy world.
That's what we're hoping for.
It's been a real intellectual adventure, and we appreciate you coming along for the ride. Keep those philosophical gears turning. You never know what you might discover. Until next time, folks.